So today our session is about intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding. And Angela, who has published a mini review, right, on this topic?
Sort of a mini review, yeah.
Yeah, and who was a master's student in the lab. She'll be talking about intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding for you all. So Angela, do you want to just share the links to our our website? Angela shared the link, and our YouTube channel. We do have fast facts posted for this, and we will be adding a bunch of exercise related fast facts and videos that may not always correspond with the topics you see. So Angela, I'll just mute myself and go ahead and get started.
Okay, so I'm just going to start off by sharing my screen. Can everyone see that okay? All right. So, sorry about that. Okay, so, all right, there we go. All right, so as was mentioned, today's topic is going to be focused on intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding. And I know this seems to be talked about a lot nowadays and for various reasons, and it's kind of a hot topic. So hopefully we'll dive into that a little bit more for you all. And I normally monitor the chat, but since I'm giving the presentation, if you have questions throughout it, just drop them in the chat if you don't want to forget them, or you can always wait till the end and we should have some time there. So the objectives for today's talk are first to define intermittent fasting as well as time-restricted feeding, because those are sometimes, used interchangeably, but don't always necessarily mean the same exact thing. And then also to learn about the different forms of both intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding. And then lastly, we'll conclude with understanding the potential benefits, the possible risks, and where the current research is with regards to intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding. So to start off with just, the basic definitions. So intermittent fasting is actually just a broad umbrella term, which describes an eating pattern that consists of either hours or days of eating minimal to no food without being deprived of essential nutrients. And so then you move into time-restricted feeding, which is also sometimes referred to as time-restricted eating. And that kind of falls underneath that umbrella term of intermittent fasting. So it's like a subset of it, in which you are fasting each day and only eating each day during a specific time period, whether that be 8 or 10 hours. Some go as much as 12. But again, we'll talk more into the different forms of that. Okay, so I will go into more detail about each of these, and they will go pretty quick, but just so that you can see, the list of each. Intermittent fasting, some different forms of that are alternate day fasting, 5-2 fasting, also referred to as the 5-2 diet, the 24-hour fast, sometimes referred to as eat, stop, eat diet. I learned about these. They are not used in research, but I thought I would present them anyway in case you see the terms used. So there's the warrior diet and the spontaneous meal skipping. And then again, these time-restricted feeding styles on the right. So you have the 16-8 method and the 14-10 method. Again, those are styles of intermittent fasting technically, but more specifically, they're time-restricted feeding. So like I mentioned, these are going to go pretty quick because they're going to give you an overview of what each of these styles looks like, kind of, mapped out to like what a week would look like, and a brief definition of each. But all these slides will be posted to the website. So if I go too quickly or anything, you can always go back and access them. So the first style of intermittent fasting is alternate day fasting. This is where you fast every other day and eat every other day. So you're constantly alternating between the two. And you can see that, days 1, 3, 5, and 7, you would eat normally. And then on days 2, 4, and 6, you would fast. And in this graphic, which I did not make myself, I pulled these all from Healthline, but I thought they visualized them really well. The option is either a full 24-hour fast or potentially eating just only a few hundred calories. And that could range anywhere from 500 to 600 calories. And there's discrepancy on whether those ranges should vary based on sex as well. But that hasn't really, I think the whole problem right now is that there's not like, one uniform definition used for any of these at this point in time. So you kind of have that option on the day 2, 4, and 6 when you are fasting. The next form is the 5-2 diet. And this is also sometimes called the twice a week method because for obvious reasons, you eat normally 5 days a week. And then on the other 2 days, you are restricting to only about those 500 to 600 calories. Again, they're showing here how it can be recommended that, women may stay close to that 500 calorie mark, whereas men may stay close to that 600 calorie mark, but still maintaining a really low calorie intake on those fasting days. Now, the third is the 24-hour fast. This is also called the Eat, Stop, Eat method. So you fast for a full 24 hours, 1 to 2 days a week. That 1 to 2 days being flexible based on schedule and preference. So it could be just 1 day or 2 days, whatever, meets what you want to follow. And then all the other days you eat normally. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that the warrior diet and the spontaneous meal skipping, which is the next one, I did not know about. They also have not been used in research anywhere, but I thought I would present them just because I did come across, the terminology and thought it would be helpful to share them in case you also see them in your research. So the warrior diet and the spontaneous meal skipping diet were both promoted by, fitness experts. Not researchers, and the warrior diet specifically focuses on eating small amounts of fruits and vegetables during the day and only eating 1 large meal at night, somewhere between a set 4-hour time period. That's not to say your meal has to last 4 hours, but if your goal is to eat between 4 and 8 every night for your last large meal, then you always are eating your last large meal between that time period. And then the spontaneous meal skipping, this is simply where you skip 1 to 2 meals when you don't feel hungry or don't have time to eat. And this also kind of ties back to some of the other conversations we've had in previous D-FEND sessions where maybe you're just eating more mindfully. So if you're not hungry, don't feel compelled to eat. You don't necessarily have to eat a full 3 meals every day. So this is paying more attention to, maybe your schedule or your meal, like food choices at your meal times and things like that. So now we're going to move into the time restricted feeding or time restricted eating forms. So first we have the 16-8 method, and these are pretty similar, just 2 variations of the same concept. So the 16-8 method is simply where you fast for 16 hours a day and you only eat 2 to 3 meals according to how hungry or how full you feel during an 8-hour time period. And that 8-hour time period is not really well defined. It's basically, really up to you and what works best for your schedule. So if that means 12 to 8 p.m., great. But if you're someone who gets hungry earlier in the day and, tends to stay fuller later, then maybe you shift that starting time to 10 instead of starting as late as 12 in the afternoon. And then similarly, the second method is the 14-10 method. So this is where you fast for 14 instead of the 16 hours, and you eat your 2 to 3 meals during a 10-hour time period. This also shows, a third meal added, whereas the last one only had 2 meals. Again, that's up to you and how hungry or full you feel. There's no set number of meals, but you are restricting all of your food intake to that set 8 or 10-hour time period with both of these methods. And the advantage to the 14-10 method is if you are someone who has a little less predictable of a schedule, or your day starts earlier and goes later for work, and you need more, food intake or stamina flexibility, maybe this is a better option because it's allowing you more time on either end of the day to get that food intake. So what is allowed during the fast? Well, during any of these fasts, you are allowed to drink water and also highly encouraged to drink water, because just because you're not taking in food does not mean we can disregard maintaining proper hydration in our body. You are also typically allowed to still drink black coffee. I want to emphasize that that's black coffee. So you cannot add cream, milk, or sugar, because those would be, no longer maintaining that fast. You're adding calories. And then any 0-calorie beverages. What is not allowed during the fast is any solid or caloric foods and beverages. Now, a lot of times people are like, okay, so if I am fasting and, I'm trying to eat my 2 to 3 meals a day, what foods should I be eating during those meals? Well, you want to avoid processed high calorie foods. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is in the coming slides. But that should just be, general basis, try to avoid those. Also lean proteins, fruits, vegetables, carbohydrates, and fats. Uh, those are generally the foods you want to make sure to be taking in when you do have your meals or on the days that you do eat. A lot of those align with, the foods that are recommended by, the MyPlate guidelines. And we do have fast facts on our website, which I would encourage you to go back to and check. There's also a fast fact on our website that talks about how much of each of those you want to be taking in daily. And that's really important to keep in mind, because when you're not eating on certain days, or you're skipping, meals, or restricting when you're eating, you still need to be mindful of what you're taking in, making sure that you're, taking in all your necessary nutrients. And then these slides will be posted to the website, as was mentioned, but this link to this US News article talks more in detail about the foods you should eat or should not eat, and then some examples of those lean proteins, good fruits and vegetables, and carbohydrate choices when you are making those choices. So the big question that everyone, always wants to know, so is intermittent fasting and time restricted actually good for you? Well, we will talk about the potential benefits. So it may help you naturally eat less if you participate in these. Some studies have found that time restricted feeding can help reduce the number of calories you eat in a day. This is simply due to the fact that our bodies can only feel comfortable eating so much food within a certain amount of time. And so beyond that, you just kind of have to be disciplined enough to be like, you know what, my time period is up for the day. It's going to have to wait till tomorrow. I've eaten sufficient meals to this point. However, this was not the case across all studies. Some studies didn't observe a reduction in calorie consumption, and this was due to that high calorie processed food choices during the meals they did eat. And so if you are trying to eat less or be more disciplined about portion sizing and things like that, definitely be mindful. One way to avoid still overeating is to avoid those high calorie foods. Now, this next one is regarding weight loss. So yes, there have been studies that have showed that weight loss can be a result of intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding. However, that is not actually the main goal per se, or the main interest with regards to intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding when it comes to research. It is a potential, benefit from it for certain subsets of people who may be looking for that. But the key as far as why this actually takes place is because when our bodies are fasted, we have lower glucose levels because there's essentially a metabolic switch that takes place in our body. So instead of using glucose or blood sugar for energy, it's actually using fat and ketones in our body for that energy. And with weight loss, obviously, that can be associated with reducing the risk for obesity-related diseases. Which brings me to the next benefit, in that it can potentially help to improve overall health conditions. This ranges from, obesity factors to diabetes and regulation of blood glucose, cardiovascular disease, risk of cancers, as well as neurological disorders. And then the last potential benefit is it may help to reduce inflammation and improve disease-related conditions associated with inflammation. And so, you know, a lot of that again comes back to, is that a result of weight loss? Is that a result of, you know, giving our metabolic and cellular systems in the body a break, or causing them to, you know, operate more efficiently? That part still remains unknown, but this has been found or suggested by some of the research. Now, as with, you know, most things, yes, there are potential benefits, but there are also possible risks or side effects, especially during the adaptation period of, you know, when you first start intermittent fasting or time restricted feeding. So that adaptation period, I'm using that term, that simply means, you know, when you first start, it's getting your body adjusted to, you know, this drastic change in, you know, meal times or eating patterns. So the first possible risk is that obviously you can feel hungry because you're not maybe eating as often or as much at a given time. You can also feel tired because maybe your body is not quite used to, you know, being fueled the way it is based on your meal patterns. Some have also reported experiencing insomnia, as well as nausea during those fasting days or times. One thing I did want to point out here was that nausea is, you know, possibly a higher risk for those individuals that have to take, you know, food with their medication, especially when that medication is taken early in the morning or late at night, which may fall outside of your eating window. So if that's a concern, that's definitely something, you know, to be mindful of. Or if your medication times are flexible, maybe you just work, you know, to adapt the intermittent fasting schedule to that routine. You can also experience headaches. And then some researchers, as well as physicians, have expressed concern that if you are of the healthy weight and potentially borderline underweight as an adult, given that, you know, weight loss is possible, you could be at risk to losing too much weight. But again, that may only apply to specific individuals. Now, with regards to where the current research stands, so most research currently on intermittent fasting and time restricted feeding have used, you know, both animal and human trials to look at these effects. With the human trials, they use diet records. So diet records are essentially a tool that researchers use to collect all the information about what their participants eat in a given day. And so usually it's either a software or just, you know, handwriting record keeping that gets turned into the researchers, and it's up to, you know, the participants to accurately report everything that they are eating. And I think we can all assume that there is some inaccuracy with, you know, human reporting. And so it may not be guaranteed to be the most accurate method of assessing the effects of this. Secondly, most studies have looked at short-term effects, but very few have looked at long-term health effects. And so there have been longer-term studies executed. This ranged from 8 weeks. There were some with 24 and 26 weeks in length, all the way up to one study which did take place for an entire year, 52 weeks. So with that being said, that's not to say we haven't looked at, you know, what are the effects after being on this for a longer term, but we don't know what the effects are if people are, you know, adapting to the diet for a long period of time and then coming off of it. And so some of that still needs to be researched. And there was only one study that looked at lengths greater than 26 weeks. And so more needs to be done about that. And then lastly, most research has been done in overweight and middle-aged individuals, as well as individuals participating in Ramadan. And so more research is needed in healthy weight, as well as younger and older adult populations to be able to, you know, more generalize those effects that are known. Now, a few things to keep in mind. We're almost done here. As with any healthy dietary pattern, the most benefits are gained when they are implemented as a long-term or lifestyle change. So I say long-term, but we don't know the effects that are long-term. Well, you still, if you choose to do this or you choose to make any dietary pattern, you need to give your body a chance to adapt and get used to it. And so you don't want to be like, oh, I'm gonna go on this for 2 weeks and then come off, because you don't want to cause more harm than good in getting your body adjusted. Another thing is I mentioned a lot of different forms and styles of intermittent fasting and time restricted feeding. The benefit of that is that you can pick what works best for you and your schedule. And it's also encouraged that you consider a gradual phased in schedule. So I mentioned some options that allow you to, instead of having full days where you don't fully fast, where you eat no food, maybe you do choose that, limited calorie restriction on those days. Still try to take in about 500 to 600 calories, and then do that for a time period before going to a full-on fast. And then lastly, it's important to make sure that the meals you do eat contain healthy fruits and vegetables and are balanced to meet nutritional needs, including the carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and other micronutrients required. I did mention that we have fast facts on this on the D-FEND website. So I encourage you to check those out and just make the right food choices during the meals that you are eating to make sure that you're not, going to be deficient in any of those. So in summary, intermittent fasting, which again was the umbrella term, involves full days or hours of completely fasting and limited calorie intake. Whereas time-restricted feeding, a subset of intermittent fasting, is a specific type of intermittent fasting that involves fasting daily and also eating daily, but during set time periods for each of those. Research has shown that intermittent fasting can have potential health benefits, but I do want to point out that the benefits of these have been shown to be relatively the same as just generic calorie restriction or continuous caloric restriction, meaning that you are eating less calories every single day. And it's important that you are still getting all the necessary nutrients needed from the foods and meals that you do eat when not fasting. So again, avoiding those processed high calorie foods. And lastly, pick what works best for you in terms of your schedule. And I recommend that you do that only after speaking with a licensed dietitian or physician, given that, this can affect risk of disease or underlying conditions specific to each individual. And I always say that if you can't stick to it long term, it may cause more harm than good if you don't give it the right amount of time to adapt to that. Now, next week, Dr. Jamie Baum will be speaking again, and our topic will be focused on carbohydrates and dietary fat. So be sure to check in for that. And with that, hopefully I can answer some questions.
That was great. Thanks, Angela. I answered some of the questions in the chat.
Great.
But does anyone else have questions for Angela?
Thanks, Dr. Howie. I did put links on all of my slides to the sources that I did use. So when they are uploaded, you should be able to access those, including that US News report about the foods to eat and not to eat. Thanks, Pam.
And I know there was a lot of talk about this during DFEND 1.0. And I think, when people hear fasting, it's just making sure you know which one you're following and, like Angela said, sticking to it.
Angela, what do you think about people using the meal replacement things like Boost and Ensure and all of those as one of their meals? I know someone that does that for the morning, and sometimes a bacon or egg, and then at lunch nothing. And this is 5 days a week, and then eat a normal meal at night, but very few carbohydrate. I mean, no bread, mainly protein and vegetables and fruits.
Yeah. So it just sounds like they're following a generic, like, you know, higher protein diet, which is okay. You know, there's still going to be some carbohydrates found in those Boost shakes or Ensure shakes, whichever they may be taking. And that seems to be okay as long as they're meeting a lot of their, you know, nutrient intake for the day. There have been benefits found to be associated with higher protein diets. But I will say that, you know, they may need like more whole solid foods if they are doing that in conjunction with intermittent fasting. You didn't mention if they were, so it may be okay. But I think it's really just making sure they pay attention to, you know, the well-roundedness of their diet. Because I think those meal replacement shakes can be great, especially to help with keeping you fuller longer, or maybe a healthier option to avoid, you know, a higher calorie processed food option, or, you know, higher carbohydrate sugar option. But you don't want to use that to sub every meal, obviously. Use it in moderation, I would say.
Oh, I forgot to mention, when he comes home, he has a snack of nuts
Okay. Yeah.
and raw coconut.
Okay. Yeah. So it just sounds like he's definitely making sure that he's getting in those
Lost lots of weight. Very skinny. People say you look sick, but he feels great and says he's wonderful and does a lot of exercise. So I just thought I'd throw that in too.
Yeah, it sounds like he's definitely getting his sources of like healthier fats and still that protein intake then. So we had one person say that replacing some minerals with salt water will help with side effects. I did not come across that. That may be true. I am not sure, but that is something that we can look further into.
Any other questions in the 3-minute window? And I think, you know, that's important to note that there is the 8-16, and I think you talked about it, Angela. Some people follow one that where you eat for 10 hours and don't eat for 14 hours. And like some people recommend starting at noon, so you can, like, because eating dinner, you know, as a group may be more important. But if you're a breakfast person, there's no reason you can't start this like 7 or 8 a.m. and finish earlier.
Yeah. And I think the benefit for a lot of people is that you can still have black coffee. So if you're focused on that caffeine fix, as long as you can, you know, sacrifice that cream or sugar you add to it, then you still can start your day with some energy.
Yeah. So I know, like, a lot of people who have started it, it's hard for them to make it past like the 2-week mark, because if you are used to eating in the morning, sometimes those headaches and like the stomach growling before noon are hard to power through. But once they make it through, they find it. And I can't remember if you said this, Angela, but there is some data that shows like these kind of diets work better for men than women.
I did not talk about that.
Yeah.
But I think that, you know, the key with intermittent fasting and time restricted feeding, and you did just touch on this, is that, you know, it may take longer than 2 weeks to get yourself on the right schedule, and it may take trial and error to figure out which one works best for you. But I think it's important to just, you know, kind of work with your schedule. Don't feel like there's just like one answer to it, but whatever you end up establishing is what you stick to.
And in the end, it's just about another way to cut calories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I touched on at the very end, but
yeah.
Overall caloric restriction for a continuous amount of time has been shown to have relatively the same effects as this intermittent fasting.
Yeah, and I think one reason
best for you.
Yeah, I think people like it because it's just a rule. So instead of, like, the theory is that you don't have to track, you don't have to change what you're eating. That's how they sell it, at least like the original creators of this lifestyle. You just eat whatever, and you can start like at noon and you stop at 8. That's it. So no tracking on devices, nothing. You just start and stop. And I think that's one reason like men seem to be more compliant than women for this research, because it's just like a rule. Don't have to think about it, where women tend to be more thinkers and like emotional eaters. So sometimes they struggle with those boundaries, but they're still studying it. There's a lot of research being done in this field. Like, what is are there better results if you eat more protein? Are there better results if you actually focus on a healthy eating pattern within this time? But I think one reason it is so popular is that they claim you just don't need to track anything. You can eat whatever you want, just stop at this time. So yeah, do we have any intermittent fasters that want to share their experience? You don't have to, but.
I don't mind. I'm Sherry Sanchez. I work at the Cooperative Extension Office.
Hi, Sherry.
I've intermittent fast for at least a year. My initial goal was to lose weight. I've done that. Now my goal is reaching autophagy and getting younger. I'm almost 62 years young. So I have a lot of experience with it. I don't choose to go over a 24-hour fast. That's my preferred method. And I do mix it up so that the metabolism doesn't stall out. I understand that metabolism will start expecting the same thing all the time. And if you don't change it up a little bit, you could start seeing a stall. But yeah, I enjoy a 24 fast, and I eat very well at bedtime, at supper time. But one of the clues is being, if you enjoy the lifestyle, I'm also follow a keto protocol, being fat adapted, or just, Whole 30 and one of those where you lower your carbs, that will help you during your fasting period like you wouldn't believe, is not being dependent on carbs. So that's a huge takeaway too. So, but I enjoy it.
Thanks for sharing. I think you hear, a lot of people switch it up and do it's just another way for weight management that may work for some people. Okay. Any other questions for Angela?
If you do have questions and don't want to ask them or anything, you can always email us and we can try to address them there.
Yeah, but thank you, Angela, for your presentation, and join us next week where we get into some of the basics just about different types of carbs and fats. We appreciate everyone calling in, and happy Friday. Thank you.